No problem, no problem. So you have both a platform and a podcast. So you want to focus on the company, and that is beyond your, if I could get around my mic to my notes, your hammock. Tell us a little bit about your platform.
Yeah, Beyond Your Hammock, officially it's a registered investment advisor company. We are a financial planning firm that helps people in their 30s and 40s, typically making six-figure incomes, create wealth from that income.
Okay, for the person who is, I guess, is that technically a Henry high income, high earner, not rich yet. So for the person who, where do I want to take that? I'll say there. So they're six figures and they want to transition to wealth. What is, other than obviously working with your illustrious company, what is step one for that person who wants to move from, okay, I'm making good money. I'm going to say six figures is good money. Some people on YouTube might feel differently. What's step two?
Step two is understanding the power of your cash flow, right? Because usually we start off with making what, $30, $40, $50,000. And then if we're going to move to the six-figure mark, we take leaps and bounds, right? There's promotions, there's new jobs, there's maybe some equity compensation that comes into play and suddenly makes you have significant cash flow. Hint like Moderna, for example. If you're part of Moderna, suddenly your cash flow is pretty flush. So understanding the power of that cash flow and then revamping your budget to maybe bring it up your lifestyle a little bit, but also, and more importantly, bring up your savings rate to match the new cash flow to start to really grow that wealth.
Is there a, I'll toss out the rate that I've heard, save at least 20%, but is there, because you also have about, I think it's 70% of the individuals, even though they're making six figures, also still 70%, I should say, of individuals are still living paycheck to paycheck. So is there a magic amount? Is it get started, or is there a threshold that people should be striving towards once they start to get towards that six figure to start to really make a difference, start to build wealth in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, if someone says, how much should I save? I say, well, how much are you saving? And then if they say 10%, I say go 15. If they say 15, I say go 20. But if I'm going to talk about the sweet spot, 25% is my go-to number.
Okay. Why 25? That's higher than I usually hear. Why 25%?
Because when you start to save 25% of your income, and this is for people, like if you're making $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 or more, it gets a lot easier if you pay attention to save more of a percentage of your income, because your needs are down here now and the rest of it's going to be all choice spending and then saving. So there's plenty of room there. But ultimately, if you start to save 25% and you do it consistently every year, the combination of that savings rate plus a good rate of return on your investments is going to give you the freedom and flexibility to do pretty much anything you want once you hit that 50, 60 year marker. So unlike the FIRE people who might want to retire at 40, which if you say 25%, that's probably not enough. You probably need to be 40, 50, 60%. The people that are generally working for a normal length of a career, that's the number that really compounds that wealth out. And you can start to be very choosy on what you want to do versus being forced to do something you don't want to necessarily do anymore.
So I'm going to take some assumptions here, hopefully of no offense to this listening audience. I'm sure they're way ahead of the curve, got probably 30, 50, 40,000. I'm talking to everybody else that they're going to recommend this podcast to after they leave a 5-star review. So they've got nothing. This hypothetical person that I'm talking about, would you recommend that they go with a savings account first, build the emergency fund, or straight into looking to those higher returns, which is typically going to come with investing, with savings returns being so low these days?
Yeah, looking at the cascading effect, right? Where's the next dollar go? The first dollar is really going to go to your savings account, like you said, for emergency reserves, because that's the safest place to keep money. You don't want to lose that money. It's for emergencies only, so keep it set aside. But once you get past that 3 to 6 month of monthly expense number, then you want to start socking away some cash into investments. So 401k usually comes with a match. I mean, you want to hit that up. If you have an HSA, a health savings account that's connected to your health insurance, then you probably want to put that money in there too. max that out. I think it's at $3,600 for an individual now, and $7,200 for a family. And then moving to a taxable investment account after that. And that's really going to be a general flow, right? We can talk about IRAs and Roth IRAs, things like that. But if you're making big money, you're going to max out your 401k. You're going to max out your HSA. You're going to start to fund taxable investment account. And that's going to really get you pretty far down the road to investing.
And now I'm going to sweep back in the other group. So we're talking about six figures, and I can relate to that because people, well, certain people don't want to talk about it, but it does get easier to save when you have more money to do so. I know it's a fundamentally mind-blowing concept, but for those individuals, so let's go down, let's say 50 to, I guess in this case it'd be 99. So 50,000 to 99 a year. What's the starting point? And I know this is going to be different for different cost of living across the country and things like that, but I feel like that's the next echelon. What is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do you know when you're ready to start saving? I mean, are you always ready? Because I know some people, they're probably, like I said, hypothetical people that don't listen to the show, living paycheck to paycheck. How can they get started? Which is probably really difficult for them.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing if you haven't done it before. It's just like working out a muscle, right? If you haven't bench pressed in your life and you go jump into the 300-pound bench press, you're going to kill yourself. So same thing goes with saving. If you're not saving anything, take baby steps. The first thing to do is look at your cash flow. It's a very common recommendation, but it's something that people don't often do because it sounds scary. But ultimately, it's just about the facts, right? What comes in, what do you spend, what's left over? And if you're spending too much, there's going to be nothing left over, and maybe even negative left over, which means now you have credit card debt. We don't want that. But inside of the what do I spend, there's the fixed things that you can't change month to month. It's rent, it's car payments, it's things that if you stop paying, you're going to be in trouble. And then it's everything else, which is very much the choice spending for most people, like restaurants, travel, gifts, and things like that you can choose to spend, but you don't have to spend. And it's that choice spending that is the first place to go. If you can't save money because there's nothing left over, you go to that choice spending and you say, what of this choice spending do I value? And I'm guessing it's not going to be everything. And if you don't value it, stop spending it and save it instead. That's the simplest way to start.
And to that point, because folks have, I guess, challenged would be the respectful word I use. They're not always respectful in their comments, but so the stat is somewhere between 60-70% of income is just in those three categories that you listed there in the beginning. So rent, which I believe is 30, car somewhere around 15 to 20%, and then transportation, whatever the math is, rounding that out. So I'll go back to your point on the choice spending. So that's going to leave them about 30 to 40% of their income to tackle or start to reduce. So for me, that was, I don't know if this dates me because I don't feel like anyone has cable anymore, but I cut cable and did all those things back before you could buy 17 different packages that are 3 times as expensive as cable now, and all these apps and things like that. And then that actually, it did help me. I saved like, and this is all in the book, but I say like I think it was $5,000 a year. It's $2,400 for cables because cable's about $200. Of course, if I'm going to go cable, I had to go big, so I had to like the premium package, the NFL package. Probably had the MMFA and MMA fight package, but it was $200. Had everything you can imagine on that cable package. And that gets you to a fixed cut point. What is your thoughts on for those individuals? I'm going to go with home and or rent to tackle as far as cutting back there, because that's another big chunk. Have you seen people? It's hard for people to go backwards in lifestyle. So do you have any advice or insights there?
Yeah. And you do bring up a good point too, because depending on who you're talking to and how much they're making and where they live in the country, there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all advice here. And I really am talking about the 6-figure people. And just to be clear, and I want people to know this too, because you don't always get this from just looking at somebody, but I mean, when I started my career, I was making $33,000 a year. It climbed up to 70 it dropped down to about $18,000 a year when I started to become a financial advisor. So I know what it's like not to support a family at that level, but I know what it's like to not have anything but what you need to get by. Right. And then I started to build up, and I had to really hone in on my cash flow at that point, because all I had was cash flow, and I could control a little bit of where my money went, but not much. And then as I built things up, I controlled lifestyle creep in a way that allowed me to start to open up the gap. And that gap is the savings, right? Keep your lifestyle low, open up the gap, bring up your income, and start to save a lot more. That said, when I talk about housing, usually my number is 20%, whether it's rent or a home ownership situation. The 20% number is my target for allowing us to spend and also save a lot, right? There's a lot of room to choice spend and save when you have your home cost capped at 20%. And to be clear, with rent, it's just the rent. But with home ownership, that's principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and general maintenance, which I usually put at 2% of the value of the home.
Okay, you've given me a lot to work with here, because I will say that, and maybe that's with intention, that 20%. So you were higher on the savings rate, and you're lower on what people typically are cap housing at. So I usually hear around 30%. So let me explore that a little bit. Why targeting housing at 20%? Let me say that, because you answered why you target that, so you can give a bit more flexibility. How did you get to that 20% number over time?
I get to that 20% number by doing thousands of projections for hundreds of people over my career. It's just trial and error, seeing what works and seeing where the most successful savers and wealth growers tend to be. It's really the 15 to 20% marker is kind of where they hang out. When we start to get above 20%, it's not like you can't afford a house. And by the way, 20% of gross income, not 20% of after-tax income.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not like you can't afford a house if it's cost you 25, even 30% of your gross income. It just makes doing other things a lot harder. If you have student loan debt, it makes it a lot harder to pay that down significantly and quickly. If you have a travel bug, it makes you not be able to spend on luxurious travel if you want to do that. And certainly, again, what takes the most hit is the savings rate when it comes to that kind of thing.
And I'm not I'm an auditor by trade, so people have mistakenly assumed that I'm good at math. So I'm not going to be able to back into this number. I'm good at Excel. Back into this number off the top of my head, but I know in The Millionaire Next Door, and it's something to the effect of to maintain wealth, or if you ever want to achieve wealth or become wealthy, his recommendation, and I believe his was actually net, was never to buy a home total cost that was more than 2 times your salary. So if y'all have a salary or a combined salary of $70,000, that's $140,000 home. And I know some people are hearing these numbers and they're like, that's impossible where I live. This can't be done. An individual commented on my Instagram yesterday that you can't live in Austin on $50,000, even though I live there on $20,000. He found out I was from Austin. He unfollowed me, probably blocked me. That's such is the way of the nature of the internet. And so but what I think is it's important for these discussions to drive towards a hard number. Now, of course, I'm an auditor. I want to go towards a hard number. And, that's why I have guests on to help with the emotional aspect of it. But, when you have a fixed number in your example of 20% for gross income, in this case, that's a very simple, not simple, but it's a mathematic formula that you can come to. Like, this is the number. This is what we're striving to. Have you... I guess it's 2 parts: seeing that help people, and then if yes or no, what do they struggle with the most with that fixed number?
Well, it's a good question, and I think it does help some people, and it really puts other people in a jam. The people that it helps are the people that haven't already set their mind on or started the process of buying a house before learning what the numbers should be. Because if they're pot committed emotionally to buying this house that is over budget based on my example, they usually don't back out. They say, we'll figure it out. Because, when you see that house, you love it. You want to never let it go. It's a tough one. But it's the people that are doing this in advance, laying out the numbers in advance, saying, well, here's my current situation, and it's, 10 to 15% of my gross income. And I want to buy another house. And I know this next house is going to be more expensive because it's going to be in a different neighborhood, or it's going to be more in the city, or whatever you want to do. Then you can target, well, what is that number? What can that number be? How much more can I go than what I'm paying now and still be in that range? And that gives them the freedom to say, oh, I actually can save or can spend more and still not have that be totally detrimental to my savings game.
Is your 20%, do you still keep that fixed? Or let me ask this another way. Is that 20% with the assumption that they don't have consumer debt or personal debt or student loans, or is the 20% not fluctuate? Because, I've on the other side, I've been with people trying to game the system since the beginning. So I'll be like, 30% is a good number. They're like, oh, well, I paid off my debt, so now I can put 60% towards the home, right? I'm like, it's not how it works. So what about you? Is that 20% go down, I guess I should say, if they have other debt and consumer debt and obligations?
There's so many examples of different iterations of that it's tough to answer that question directly. But I will say that sometimes you need to live in a place, right? You need to have a house. And depending on where you are in the country, that 20% is going to be all you can do. You can't go much less than that. And if you can't do that, then unfortunately, the paying off the debt part is going to come out of your other savings and or your choice spending. Maybe you're not traveling as much as you otherwise would. So at least you have that fixed number to target for housing. And then the rest can be a little bit more flexible until you get rid of that debt, if that's really your goal, which I hope it is. Unless it's a mortgage, then I don't necessarily think that because the rates are so low. Different conversation. But then you can move ahead and save more after that debt is gone.
I like that you're stern. That's why I was testing it. I like that you're stern on that 20% because, people try to move the percentage over to the home once they get rid of the debt. And you're saying that if they do have debt, that actually comes out the choice spending, while that home budget stays fixed. So I like that. I think we've got a nice saturated foundation for why I have you here, which was which apparently I said it wrong the first time. So let me try to nail it. The Great Resignation. I saw an article that you were quoted in from Business Insider from Tanza. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to grab her last name, but I'll get that in the show notes. As a journalist for Business Insider, it caught my eye on the Twitter because I think the tweet was, I'm quitting my job, but not in a negative way. It's like, I'm quitting my job, and this was the article that led to it. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. Saw that you were quoted in there, and we had met before, for those who are new here, at FinCon, I want to say 4 years ago now, definitely before the pandemic. Small world, big world type of things. I thought, Financial Planning Month is a great opportunity to get back with Eric. Reached out to you, and then I went to the article, which is titled from Business Insider, I'm quitting my job this week without another one lined up. Here's my advice to fellow millennials looking to make the leap. I went to click, and it said this is a premium Business Insider link. I'm really about this personal finance life, so I was too cheap to click or pay for the link, but I did get some other notes here. So can you talk a little bit about the conversation that you had with Tanza, and really just for, millions of millennials are quitting, reevaluating their financial lives, their professional and personal lives as it relates to the pandemic, as it relates to their purpose and finances and work and life. So what did that conversation look like for you? And let's go with Tanza's opening speech. What does your finances, or what would be your financial insights for the person who's quitting without another job lined up?
Prepare before you quit, because the fact that you're quitting without having another job is putting a lot of risk on that action. And as a financial planner, I'm all about managing risk, identifying it and managing it appropriately, taking it when you can, but not taking it when you would otherwise be destroyed if it shows up. So in that case, it's saving as much as you can to have stored away in a bank account, not investments, because we don't want to lose this money, because that's going to be your income for however long it is that you don't have a job, unless of course you have unemployment income.
Yeah, let me jump in right there. why in this circumstance choosing a bank account, savings account versus an investment, and then what is that time frame that you would recommend?
Yeah. Well, it's the liquidity factor. When might I need this money? So my general rule is if you need money in less than 3 years, you really should stay out of the stock market. You should probably just stick it in a bank account, savings, money market, CD. All rates are pretty crappy right now, but that's the place where it's going to be covered. There's no risk of loss because, again, you need that money soon. So if you put it in the stock market and the stock market tanks like it did in March 2020, you don't have it anymore, you have less, and you need the money, what are you going to do? Right? So it's safe in the bank. You use it as your income for however long you need to be out of work, and then you're fine.
So I was able to find some articles that I could get into. And they bucketed it for me, so I'll kind of walk through those. You've hit on emergency fund. And once again, for context for folks, you went more conservative there, which now I'm not surprised by. I normally hear if you need it within 5 years, so you're saying within 3, so you're being more tight and stringent there. And then savings. So what should this individual, so one of the buckets from CNBC, before you join the Great Resignation and quit your job, here's some things you need to know. What do folks need to take into consideration for healthcare or healthcare related costs now that they don't have a full-time employer?
Yeah, that's a challenge, right? There's obviously the easy one, which is expensive. Going with Cobra from your former employer, you have 18 months where you can keep your existing health insurance, but it's going to cost you a heck of a lot more than it did when you're at your job, probably, because you're going to pay the full amount instead of having it supplemented by your employer. And if you don't have that, I mean, there's the marketplace, right? You can go out there and find a plan, and depending on if you're single or with a family, then that's going to cost you. There's a big range there. Some people might even go as far as, if you're single and you're just wanting to cover the extreme emergencies of like significant health costs, you might get something that is lower on the premium side, but also lower on the coverage side. And it's just going to cover extreme situations like emergency room in the hospital because you lost your arm, right? Like it's going to cover that, but it's not going to cover if you go to the specialist because you have a dermatologist visit you have to take.
And, forgive me to you and the listening audience for my ignorance on this. I'm not even sure if you're mandated anymore to carry healthcare coverage, but my question would be, assuming that you are not mandated to do so, is there ever a scenario, even for short-term unemployment? So let's say I'm quitting without another job, but I plan to only be in this position for no more than 12 months. So 6 to 12 months. Is there ever a scenario where you say this makes financial sense to go without healthcare coverage?
I don't think it ever makes financial sense because the risk is so big, right? The idea of insurance is it's covering risks that are somewhat common that you could not afford to pay without insurance. So that is one of those things, right? It's not uncommon that you fall and break your leg, right? And if you can't afford to cover your costs, what are you going to do? You need to fix your leg. So it's a mandatory thing to get the insurance coverage just to protect yourself. That doesn't mean you have to. No one has to do anything. And if you want to take that risk, just know that it's a significant risk. You better know when you want to get back into the insurance game and commit to it and do it because it's not worth being fully exposed for too long.
I appreciate that. And then also, again, for my own education, both, I guess. Let's say an individual did have an HSA account with their employer when they departed. Do they lose those funds? I'm going to say in this scenario, if it makes a difference when they quit.
No, there's a difference though. HSA versus FSA, okay. Right? HSA, health savings account, that money never goes away. You can use it along your entire life if you want to.
Oh, okay.
Or you can save it and invest it, which is another conversation, but that's a great way to grow your a medical IRA, we'll call it, for the future. But the flexible spending account, the FSA, that's use it or lose it. So if you leave and you haven't used it, I think you lose it.
Okay. Okay, appreciate that. I'm going to go out of order here just in case the journalists try to track me down. There are other two recommendations were this is actually before you quit, to negotiate and then also talk about employer perks. So I think the example that real life example that I would have there is when I'm currently with my employer now, we were able to do 3 days in the office, 2 days from home, and part time. And that was just something I was able to negotiate as both a result of the pandemic. So we were home full time. We're about 75% back in the office. So there was and my days are flexible. So I just have to be in the office 3 days. Now, as a senior millennial, geriatric, if you will, I think the whole thing's ridiculous. I don't know why these 3 days matter any other different than these 5 days, but that's what's negotiated. And that's how the biweekly check comes across. But the other one that they have here, since I went out of order, is okay. So I know this happens. It almost happened to me, but luckily cooler heads prevailed. That delicious 401k sitting there with $50,000 in it. What do they do with it?
Don't touch it. That money is saved. You worked hard to get it in there. It's tax deferred. Taking that money out, you might be able to take a little bit out and put it back if you would take a loan out on it. But if you leave your company after taking out a loan, you are immediately required to pay it all back. And if you don't, it's all taxable, and there's a penalty if you're under 59 and a half. So that is a disaster if that happens. And I've seen it happen before. So don't take out a loan from the 401k before you go. And you can't take out a loan after the fact. And otherwise, if you don't take out a loan from a 401k, you have to take it out early if you're, again, under 59 and a half, which means you're paying a 10% penalty, you're paying taxes on that money, and what looked like a decent amount, maybe $100,000, becomes very quickly under $50,000 for you.
And I believe, so I'll just ask the question for the benefit of the audience. What about the person who's like, well, it's my previous employer. I don't want to leave it there. And I guess it's two parts. I'm going to go with the employee who's unvested, because I actually don't know the implications. So let's say the employer's been matching, but you haven't vested yet. I actually don't know how that works. So we can talk about that. But just more so the general concern of, well, I'm leaving my money with a previous employer. Can you talk about ways to alleviate that concern?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I ask people, because I've heard that concern before, why are you concerned? And depending on the answer, it may not even be a real reason to be concerned, because ultimately it's a 401k plan. The former employer cannot pierce the bubble. They can't grab the money. They can't hold it hostage. They can't do any of that, because ERISA, which is the acronym for the regulatory body for public or employee retirement plans, has rules that say that money is yours no matter what. So we could just sit there, be in that old 401k, and nothing is going to harm it. You could also move it to an IRA. You can certainly roll it into a new 401k if you have a new 401k at your job. But those are the three options you really have, and they're fine. Either one, any of them are fine depending on what the circumstances are. And there's a way to evaluate which is the best move, but that's a longer conversation.
Yeah, and I can confidently tell people, because I've rolled no less than 3 times. And when I say I rolled, that means I sat on the phone. I've never done anything. Like I advise people that there's always someone eager to take your money. So I literally call the next investment broker. And I'm like, hey, I want to roll. And I think before I can finish my sentence, they're like, we got you. And so they're always on top of it. They automate everything. And it's not a lot of money. In the grand scheme of money, I think the first time is like $27,000 or something like that. Now, it was super nerve wracking. They're like, sign here. I'm like, I know these guys are going to steal my money and go off to Vegas and I'll never see it again. And they're going to like have a hangover weekend. But every time it's worked, it always shows up in the account, because I monitor it 5 to 7 days later, business days, which are nerve wracking later. So it always works out. And when you roll, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're not taxed on rolling from one employer equivalent IRA to another tax equivalent. So for one 401k to another new employer's 401k, is that accurate and correct?
Yeah, if you do it by the official way, right, you have the right paperwork and you submit it properly, then it's rolling. Oh, it's a rollover from the old 401k to an IRA, or rolling the old 401k to a new 401k. Mm-hmm. If you're transferring an IRA to an IRA, it's called a direct transfer. So you would direct transfer an IRA into another IRA. So Fidelity to Vanguard or somewhere like that. But all of it is no penalties, no tax ramifications, as long as you're going like kind to like kind. So tax deferred retirement account to tax deferred retirement account. If you go tax deferred to Roth, you pay all the taxes on that. It's fine to do, but you got to pay all the taxes.
I appreciate that. And this one is from, I grabbed a few out of here, moving towards the wrap, but making sure we hit all the key points. This is from Yahoo Finance. Quitting without another job, 16 tips from people who have taken the big leap. I pulled 3 forward. Number 1 is they said to automate, which is just general advice that I recommend for folks. Is I try to remove myself out as many processes as possible, both within the business and with my money, because even 10, 20 years into the game, I still want to touch it. Normally to do something irresponsible that won't benefit or help me at 60 or 70. So I automate myself out of that process. So I agree with that. One tip that I had in here that I don't know why I didn't think of it in this way, because I'm always talking about mentorship, but is also networking. So they're talking about, for people who have taken the leap. Do you have any thoughts or advice on either mentorship or network? And the third one that I was going to hit, if you have another one, was they call it a freedom fund. I call it an FU fund. And yes, it does stand for what y'all think it does. So is there anything that we have not hit for the person who is either, I'm going to say, hopefully before they listen to this podcast, before they make the leap, before they make the great leap, what advice would you have for people preparing for the Great Resignation?
Well, I mean, the first, I want to say that I don't agree that it's a good move to jump ship without another place to go. If you can, and if you plan, you can, planning out some options, right? You don't have to necessarily jump from one job to the next, but maybe you can identify a couple places to kind of throw your hat in the ring to say, hey, I'm interested in these jobs. And that's where the networking comes in, right? You can network with people before you make the leap and see if you can line something up, because you might actually be able to find somebody that's looking for somebody in 3 months, which gives you an automatic 3-month gap. And then you're guaranteed that next job. And it's more of a risk-free resignation than the person that's jumping out the airplane without a parachute, which you're doing without a job lined up. I think that's really important. And I would have a plan B as well. Like plan A might be your ideal plan, but as we know, plans don't always work out the way we think they're going to do, especially when you get punched in the face, like Mike Tyson says. So plan B is, if that doesn't work, this is what I'm going to do instead. And plan B might not look all sexy, right? It might be, well, I'm going to get a job at a fast food restaurant just to pay my bills until I can find that next thing. But planning things out is not a bad thing. You don't have to walk a fine line and, feel so structured that you can't change your mind, but just thinking through things, planning things out, just gives you a lot more fluidity in what happens, and your thinking and decision-making is much more crisp when you've thought through things before they happen, right? I mean, think about like Phil Mickelson. He says every time he swings the golf club, he's picturing his swing beforehand, seeing where the ball goes and seeing where it lands. Then he swings. Same thing goes for this kind of move.
Yeah, I like the risk-free resignation. That's a great one. That actually might be the title of this show. Folks like to know that I like to pull a quote from the show for the title. And then I guess as we move to the wrap, you and I talked before we got online. You've got a little one new and introducing to the dynamic. So is there? I kind of felt like we talked about the single person's leap. Is there any way this conversation changed for family planning around the Great Resignation and financial resignation, the risk-free resignation?
Yeah, I mean, I would lean more towards the risk-free resignation if I have a spouse who's relying on my income and also a child, right? If I started my business now, when I have a wife and a 2.5-week-old, I would be petrified to do what I did, because where am I going to go if I fail? Right? There's no backing out. I was single. I had no dependents. I was renting an apartment, and I knew if I didn't make it, I could find a family member to support me for a little bit. So there was places to go. There was a safety net, if you will, underneath me. But when you're a family and there's really no safety net for you, you have to make decisions that you might otherwise not make, right? Take a few less risks than you otherwise would to protect your family.
Yeah, and I'll end with this, then kick it back to you for where folks can find you around the internet and on the social media. Having not done it, so I am not practicing what I preach, but I have seen a lot of people do it around me. I still remember, I'm not going to say her name because it's actually fairly unique, but I remember she said she was going to quit. She was way ahead of the curve because this was like 2009. I think I know I was in Denver, so it must have been 2009-ish time frame. Now, mind you, 2009, the Great Recession at that time, which just happened. She was like, "I'm gonna quit." So naturally, I asked the next logical question, like, "Oh, where are you going next?" And she's like, "I don't know. I'll figure it out. Like, stuff just kind of works out." Even reliving that conversation right now still blows my mind. But I take away from that is, I mean, to your point, if I was going to do it, it would have been a lot easier to do so. So I'm engaged now. At that same time period, like we could have like Tom Cruise did and both walked out and maybe started a 6-7 figure company. Who knows? Because she took the risk that I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go back to these golden handcuffs and start typing on my Excel spreadsheet. So on the other side, I will encourage people with the tips that Eric has provided today that when you don't have those loving obligations, I'll call them, that's actually the time to take the great risk-free resignation. So anything other closing thoughts that you have? If not, let folks know where they can find you on the social media to get even more advice and tips.
Yeah, I mean, one quick note I want to just mention that it's your life, right? You make whatever decision you think is best. Some people are much more risk on than others. Some people are really risk averse, and you just got to make your choice that you can handle, knowing that the risk means that something could show up that you didn't want. And if that thing shows up that you didn't want after choosing to do the thing on your own, not being forced into it, you can't get mad at anybody but yourself because you're taking the risk. So just be aware of that. Because believe me, I take risks when I think they're appropriate, and I don't when I don't think they're appropriate. So to each their own. But as far as where you can find me, it's beyondyourhammock.com is my website. There's a lot of blogs. There's a lot of content on there. Tells you what we do for people and how we plan for our clients. Happy to have a conversation if you think you might be a good fit for the firm, and we can see if we can help. There's a way to schedule a call right on there. I think right now it's probably maybe into the new year because of all the things we have going on towards the end of the year and the baby. But we'll get to you if that's something that you really want.
Definitely. And you also have because some people are going to be listening to this right now in the podcast, where can they scan over to find you on the podcast streets?
Yeah, we have a podcast called Beyond Finances. I will say that we've been on probably a 6-month hiatus based on the pregnancy and the new baby. But we should be picking that back up next year. But we have, a decent amount. I don't know if it's 46, 50 different episodes. Don't quote me on that, but plenty of content out there if you want to listen to my wife and I have conversations about how we think through our finances and how we help clients do what they do.
Well, I appreciate it, Eric, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Fade. You're now tuned into the smooth sounds of TMG. I'm your host, the Marcus Garrett.